Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session. Thank you for your time. Today, we will talk about process design, experimentation, and tech transfer. We will introduce a little bit the topic and how Siemens is providing some tools to help you do that. And of course, we're doing that today with our partner, Soft and Lab, and especially Julien will present a little bit the activities that he can do with some of our tools to help you facilitate, I would say, this process design phase and tech transfer. So it's really around planning your experiment, doing your DOE, your design of experiment, that will define what is necessary to be tested from the very early stage of what you know about your process. Sometimes it's just the active ingredient or just the extraction around your active ingredient or the very first step that you need to assemble based on prior knowledge. Of course, you will go through your experiment and capture the data. This is one of the first, I would say, big feature around experimentation data that Riffyn will bring is this capturing of the data coming from many different sources. And big strengths, I would say, of Riffyn is around this integrating of this data and contextualizing of the data following the FAIR principle. I think the FAIR principle is pretty well known for everyone. We're talking about data that needs to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Goal is, of course, to start capturing the knowledge and be able to reuse this knowledge across the organization. So we're breaking the silos, breaking the fragmentation of the data by integrating all this data together and be able to reuse them across time, but also across teams. And of course, what we're doing with this data is preparing. So the idea most of the time when we're working in this mode is working through an hypothesis and then validate your hypothesis. Riffyn will allow you to do that, to identify all the data that are ready to validate your hypothesis, and then you will use whatever tool you need to be able to validate your hypothesis, whether we're talking about analytics or we're talking about more modern way to approach the data through ML or AI. And of course, the idea is to have something which is iterative because Riffyn will contain versioning of your recipe. So whatever you're defining from your process, the different steps that you need to align in it, and the different material resources that you will use will evolve over time, and we know that. So from the very early stage to the late stage, so from the early phases of the product profile definition to the late stage of what we call the general recipe, where your recipe will be a little bit more mature and you're going through these phases of experimentation, whether we're in process definition or process optimization, Riffyn will allow you to capture all the information which are relevant for your experiment. So you can start very small with high level of flexibility, a little bit like you will do in an ELN. And of course, we can collaborate with ELNs, but you start by structuring the data. What are my relevant steps? What are my relevant parameters that I need to variate through my experimentation? And you start by capturing that. Of course, the level of data that you will capture over time will probably grow, and Riffyn will support you in this growing of the data and the number of iterations that you will do over time, whether you are in, I would say, discovery phase, and you have a lot of experiments with a lot of variability, or more a confirmatory phase where you have less experiment, but you confirm more some hypothesis, or you start optimizing some of the parameters. Riffyn will support you throughout this entire experimentation phase. And of course, you can even use Riffyn on the late stage of process optimization, even during clinical trials and the beginning of manufacturing. In a nutshell, if I try to summarize a little bit the way Riffyn works, you start by defining your process. You'll see that we have different tools to be able to help you on that. I will jump in more detail to that. The second part will be around experimental design, and Riffyn will support you throughout the DOE phase, the definition of what are my critical parameters, the correlation between the critical parameters and the quality attributes, and all the control strategy and assay management that you need to do around how do I manage my analytics? How do I prove the quality of my product based on the different process parameters that I have? Once you have designed your experiment and defined the different ways you want to do your experiment, then you will go through the execution of the experiment. So you'll see that Riffyn is also turning into an execution system, which will allow you to capture the data coming from different sources. Again, you can see a small extract of the different sources that Riffyn can capture data from. We're talking about, of course, equipment, files. Unfortunately, today on the lab, we don't really have real standards of the way machine equipment and other systems can really interact together. But Riffyn is pretty open to be able to capture data coming from different sources. We're also talking about other systems like ELNs or LIMS. We're also talking about real-time data or historical data coming from systems like historians or even DCS or PAT systems, of course. And Riffyn also has more than 150 APIs, so very open. You can push and pull data into and from Riffyn to do many different things around your data management. Okay, very important part of it. One of the critical aspects of Riffyn is this data integration. Why? Because we have a vision of a process standpoint. We're not talking about few steps of the experiment, especially like an ELN will do around one, I would say, experimentation. Riffyn, by designing the process from the early beginning, will allow you to join experiments done by, for instance, different teams or at different times, and we'll be able to integrate data coming from different experiments. And we'll group that into what we call a process data table, where you will have the aggregation of all the data coming from experiment, the collaboration of all data coming from different teams, and allow you to join data coming from different sources and reuse this data over time in different contexts as well. Then we're preparing the data, cleaning the data to go through the analysis phase, I would say, the analytical step, where you will be able to use tools from the market. We know that today the most of our customers already have tools to do some visual analytics, whether we're talking about BI tools or more dedicated tools. You will be able to integrate with these tools. We do have some specific add-ons for JMP, Spotfire, Tableau, and KNIME, for instance, but you can also work with more, I would say, classical Python or Jupyter Notebook, R and R Studios, if you are more into the data science, to be able to extract the relevant information from your data.
If I can add a few words, Nicolas, I like the image. I like to use the image of patchwork of solution. When I see, the environment of my customers, they have multiple solutions with multiple also databases, folders, etc. And really, with a Riffyn X solution, you have those key features of data capture and data exploitation, I would say. And this is really important, to not to lose this information and to exploit it correctly, I would say.
Yeah, thank you, Julien. I think we would like to be able to see Riffyn a little bit like a data backbone, to be able to, of course, you may have additional tools like a data lake and these kind of things. Problem of data lake is that it's good for storage, but not so good for reusability of the data. So Riffyn has this kind of unique placement where at the same time you start structuring the data, but also capturing all of them, whatever structure you have. So even if you have unstructured data, Riffyn will be very easily capable to start structuring them to be able to reuse them. And you were talking about exploitability. I think this is the part which is very important. So let me go to I would say the first cornerstone of what Riffyn is providing. Riffyn is providing this process design capability. So let me start also with a small demo. You will see that on the video, on the media player side, you will see a small video that you can enlarge if you need, where you will see a small snippet of what we can do, and in few minutes we'll be able to design a process. Why? Because Riffyn is bringing this very simple workflow tool, which is very visual, and that allows you to capture, I would say, very easily your scientific knowledge. You can even capture additional insights. You can capture snapshots, photos, additional documents and notes that you can put on the side as well. But it starts by structuring the different steps of your process using what we call an ontology. So we have inside Riffyn a vocabulary of existing steps, existing resources, existing material, which are coming from the market, from standards ontology of the life science market. And you can use and build, I would say, the different steps of your process, the different resources that you need, the critical parameters in a matter of minutes. Riffyn also allows you to, of course, share this information with other people, so you can collaborate on that with different user rights, of course, in terms of design. But you can very easily build a master process based on sub-processes. So you can build kind of your own library and collaborate on these libraries, assembling different bricks. So it will be like a Lego block. You can also have something a little bit more complex. You can see here in the video, you can bring formulation, so calculation, which will be done ahead of time, like a little bit you will do in Excel to identify which value is coming from where. So you can also capture, I would say, the essence of your critical parameters directly within the process. Okay, so that's in a nutshell. You see here that you can have complex processes or very simple processes in a matter of minutes. The second step, which is important, will be around design of experiment. So, of course, when you start designing your process, you start by identifying your hypothesis. What do I need to try? Why do I need to test? What do I need to extract as an information coming from samples? So again, you can start from a white page, or you can start from existing process. You can even reuse, I would say, structure coming from existing samples, existing runs that you have already executed, and build Riffyn on top of it. Here we're showing in the video an integration with JMP for the design of experiments. So we're using the part of the design of experiment from JMP, where because we have an add-in, we can extract the relevant information from Riffyn, bring that into JMP to design or build the experiment that is relevant for us. So here we're selecting the relevant factors that are validating for my hypothesis. In this case, we're talking about the fermentation. So we will vary the speed, for instance, the temperature, the pH, these kind of things. It's a simple three factors with two values variation. So JMP will come up with a simple hypothesis to say to be able to design this experiment, you will need 8 runs, and then the system will allow you to take this design of experiment and bring it back to Riffyn. So imagine that here we're doing that with JUMP, but it could be done with Mode, or it could be done with other tools. Knowing that if you want to do that only in Riffyn, you can also do that. Here we're showing integration, but the design of experiment can also be supported and I would say guided within Riffyn. Okay. So here we're just showing also the integration with JUMP, and the integration with JUMP is also based on our standard APIs, meaning that if you have your own DOE solution, you can also push the data. Imagine that you also are doing today DOE in Excel, for instance. You can transition smoothly from your Excel file into Riffyn very, very easily. And here you will see that you have, for instance, few steps in Riffyn. We can link the different steps. In this case, for instance, the preparation that we have at the beginning and the fermentation, and we can show that, you know, the volume of the media, for instance, or the pH of the media could have an influence on my fermentation later on. And that's one of the hypotheses that I want to validate. So this experiment will be able to design this. Next big function is around data capture and data management. So we have a lot of different, I would say, functionalities for the data capture. I will run a small video and again show you the way we can capture data, but keep in mind that we have many different ways to capture the data. First off is, of course, integration. We're not showing that today in the demo, but of course we can integrate with third-party tools, whether they are ELN, LIMS, historians, I mentioned that already, but also more simple, you know, files that we're importing. So here in the video, I'm showing how I can import a CSV file. We know that many of the equipment today are based on exporting simple files, flat files, or CSV files. And that's exactly what we're showing here. We have a way to parse the data and import them directly into Riffyn. But keep in mind that we can also do capturing the data exactly like you will do in Excel, but something which is a little bit more evolved in Riffyn, where you can do copy and paste if you want to capture specific, I would say, manual data. And we do have what we call a data validation. So because in the process design, we can define spec limits, max and mean, and these kind of things, we can directly validate the data in this part. And of course, we will prepare the data to go to the last stage, which is around data preparation and integration. So of course, we'll be able to integrate, I would say, all this data together, prepare all the data. So what we're doing is that we're building a data set which is coming from an aggregation of all the experiments that you have already done all together across experiment and across teams, of course. And we'll be able to contextualize all this data and transfer that into a vendor neutral format that can then be exported. Again, in the video here, I'm showing you we can integrate that with JUMP, for instance, again, for data analytics. So we have a way to clean the data, simplify, reduce dimension, for instance, or highlight the relevant parameter which were, I would say, used during the process, identify the one that are already correlated, and then we can build, I would say, more advanced feature. You will see here in the video that we can integrate with visual analytics on different level, whether we're talking about, you know, classical graph or yield versus time, or more, I would say, over time, a combination of real-time data, or I would say data line and samples that we can group together, for instance. So offline and inline testing. coming together, or stability of some of the parameters. Okay. So you can evaluate the criticality. You can also evaluate the different relevant parameter and the correlation between the different value. In a nutshell, if I summarize, I would say 4 cornerstones for Riffyn. One is around process design, the graphical definition with the ontology, the collaboration, and the capturing of the scientific knowledge. The second is around experimentation and, of course, capturing the data based on a DOE. How can you prove hypothesis? How can you validate hypothesis? Something which is very visual and which brings already data into canvas that you will be able to reuse. So structuring the data. And the way we structure the data helps us, I would say, and you, to define the smart data management that Riffyn is bringing by contextualizing the data, automatically defining structure, and pushing the data for further analytics, using and leveraging on the integration with the external world, because we know that you already have an existing ecosystem. Just a step back, here we're placing Riffyn a little bit at the center, but just to give you a little bit, I would say, an overview, an highlight of Siemens' presence in the lab and in the R&D space. Julien already mentioned that Soften Lab is a Siemens partner with many other tools that we can use in the lab. And that's where a little bit we see the interaction of Riffyn with the rest of the ecosystem that you already have, but also the rest of the Siemens ecosystem. So you see more on the left-hand side our simulation portfolio, where we have many, I would say, tools that will help you from the very early stage of molecular modeling throughout the particle dynamics or the fluid dynamics that you will be able to model, to the physics-based and prior knowledge definition of process modeling with various models that we already have within our knowledge. This will constitute, I would say, the simulation data that we can bring together in an hybrid model with the real data that we're capturing from Riffyn. And we'll be able to aggregate and incorporate all this data together in a way that we'll be able to validate the model from simulation or reduce the number of physical experiments because we already have simulated data. Okay. On the lower side, you see the integration with different tools. We're talking here about multivariate, or we're talking about sampling data, more offline samples that are coming and that can be integrated. We're also talking about many different ways to capture data which are difficult to capture today through our IoT platform, for instance, to connect data directly into Riffyn and capture the data almost automatically. And of course, on the right-hand side, we see the continuity of the data. So how from the definition of the recipe that we have in Riffyn, we can go to the next stage. So to the recipe transformation, how do we start structuring the data for manufacturing, for pilot, for the execution system that will come later on, and defining that into product lifecycle management or team center tool that will be able to capture all the relevant information that we're taking from this initial experimentation phase from Riffyn. I would like to just give one word around one of our reference customer, I would say, Novonesis. So Novonesis is a newly made joint venture from formerly Novo, the Novo Group, I would say, and and around enzyme definition and enzyme production. It's one of the biggest, I would say, or leader in enzyme and biotech in the world.
Thank you for watching. To learn more about this topic, check out the links in the description. And if you enjoyed what you saw, like the video and subscribe to the channel.